welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It is Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, and I'm very happy to be with you for a second interview as well this week. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. As we get started, I do want to remind you to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this episode on. Really helps the algorithm out, gets more readers to know about the podcast. Also, if you want another way to help the podcast, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info. There you can leave a tip or a donation. That really, again, helps out the algorithm, helps out not just this podcast, but the network as a whole. Always greatly appreciated. While you're there, if you want to leave a question or a comment, you can do that as well. I'm always happy to engage with those questions or comments at the beginning of the next episode after I receive them. Again, that link is next to me in the video and we'll be scrolling along throughout the episode. It's gsmcpodcast.info. As always, every bit of support that you give and have always given is greatly appreciated. How's your week? And how was your Thanksgiving if you celebrated yesterday? It was very quiet here, of course. Last year, we had Thanksgiving with a group of friends. This year, we just stayed home, but I did make pie. I made sweet potato pie, which is... It's not my all-time favorite Thanksgiving pie. That would be pecan, but don't really have pecans here, and walnuts aren't quite the same, and so they do have sweet potatoes, and so I made a sweet potato pie for my sweet potato, for my hubby. But I made it low glycemic, so a little bit different than your normal Thanksgiving sweet potato pie, but actually very good. And I realized yesterday, I don't know, around 7 p.m. that I had eaten nothing but 3 slices of low glycemic sweet potato pie all day and a cup of coffee. And I thought, you know what? I should probably make something else. At least sweet potatoes have some good nutrients in them. But maybe I should make something with protein or something, that's not sweet potato pie. But I'm not mad at my day yesterday. We had a very quiet day, spent it together, ate pie, just enjoyed each other and the day, so cannot complain. I hope that whatever you did was also as enjoyable, involved family of whatever variety, whether biological or chosen or what have you, and whatever food you like to eat on Thanksgiving. If that is pizza, cool. If that is, my best friend had, I think she said, ribeye and twice baked potatoes. So, it doesn't have to be quote unquote traditional Thanksgiving food, as long as it makes you happy and helps you to commemorate the day and remember the things in your life for which you are grateful. That's great. Speaking of things for which I am grateful, hopefully I say it a lot in this podcast, but I am always grateful for you, the people who have been with me, whether this is your first episode or you've been with me for years. Very, very appreciative of everyone who listens to or watches these episodes. I really appreciate you. So let's get to this episode's interview. As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, I am speaking today with author Adam Nimoy about his book, The Most Human. Let me pull that up. The Most Human, Reconciling with My Father, Leonard Nimoy. Let me give you the description of the book. While the tabloids and fan publications portrayed the Nimoys as a quote-unquote close family, to his son Adam, Leonard Nimoy was a total stranger. The actor was as inscrutable as the iconic half-Vulcan science officer he portrayed on Star Trek, even to those close to him. Now his son's poignant memoir explores their complicated relationship and how it informed his views on marriage, parenting, and later sobriety. Despite their differences, both men ventured down parallel paths, marriages leading to a divorce, battling addiction, and finding recovery. Most notably, both men struggled to take the 9th step in their AA journey to make amends with each other. Discover how the son of Spock learned to navigate this tumultuous relationship, from Shabbat dinners to basement AA meetings, and how he was finally able to reconcile with his father and with himself. Again, that is a description of The Most Human, Reconciling with My Father, Leonard Nimoy. When I got the email about possibly having Adam on the podcast, my first thought was an internal fangirl squee. because my own father, big Star Trek fan, got me interested in Star Trek. We watched the original series. That's what this, is that it was referenced in that book description with Leonard Nimoy as Spock. We watched that some whenever we could see it in syndication. Remember, I grew up in rural western Montana. We had three channels, so you watched what you got when you got it. But I was familiar with the original series, and then the Next Generation came out, and we watched it as a family. And so got my dad talking about how much he enjoyed the original series, and just developed a whole dialogue and conversation with my dad and my brother. And my sister was living out of the house, but you always knew we could almost always guarantee that about 2 minutes after an episode would end, we'd get a phone call and she'd have questions. It was very cute. But we watched it as a family. And so I had this initial, like, oh, wow, this is as close to anything Star Trek related as I'm ever going to get fangirl moment. And really, really kind of bittersweet because I couldn't tell my dad about that. But interesting, and because this is, yes, meeting someone really, connected in some way to Star Trek, but also his memoir is about his relationship with his father as well as recovery. And so the connection to my father, that it was bittersweet in that way, but kind of a nice circle moment for me. Anyway, if you are familiar with Leonard Nimoy, then you're probably going to have very definitive ideas of him as a person, and that's okay. That's what we do as celebrities. But this is, again, the most human. He's a human. He was somebody's husband, somebody's father, relatives in many ways. He was somebody's son. And this book talks about being in relationship with somebody who is so well known to so many people and so many fans who probably have a pretty solid image of them in their head, excuse me. But this book is also, outside of that relationship, also about Adam's journey with recovery. And I learned a lot about that journey. I have talked to other people who have been in recovery, and I thought I knew things about the process and about AA itself, but every story is different and every story can give you new insight. And so I really appreciated that aspect of this book, and hearing Adam's perspective on his own recovery and how he utilized the tools and the steps given him through AA to help him not only on his recovery, but then also to help him reconcile with his father. So it's all intertwined within the memoir. And I am talking too much, so we are going to go to the interview with Adam. Again, the book is called The Most Human, Reconciling with My Father, Leonard Nimoy. The author is Adam Nimoy. Hi, Adam, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited to have you to talk about your memoir, The Most Human. Before we get to the book, though, would you just take a few minutes to introduce yourself so my listeners can get to know you a little bit?
Okay, well, my name is Adam Nimoy. I am the son of Leonard Nimoy, best known for his portrayal of Mr. Spock on Star Trek. I was born and raised in West Los Angeles, California. I went to undergraduate school at UC Santa Barbara, finished at UC Berkeley. I continued on at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, practiced entertainment law for about 7 years, and then got the itch to do something more creative, and following in my father's footsteps, and with a lot of help from him and a lot of night courses in filmmaking, I started directing network television for about 8 or 9 seasons in the 90s. Such shows as Ally McBeal and The Practice and NYPD Blue and Murder One and Babylon 5, Star Trek The Next Generation, Gilmore Girl. I mean, a lot of stuff during that period. After that, I was teaching filmmaking at the New York Film Academy based in New York, but they also had offices in Los Angeles where I lived. And since then, I have been writing. I've been a writer most of my life. I published a memoir in '08 entitled My Incredibly Wonderful Miserable Life. And this new memoir that I've just published called The Most Human, Reconciling with My Father, Leonard Nimoy, came out in June of this year.
Thank you. And having read the memoir, so I have a a glimpse of your life. Asking you to sum that up in 2 minutes is you did a great job, but asking anyone to sum their life up in 2 minutes is hard. So thank you for that. You mentioned the full name, the Most Human, Reconciling with My Father, Leonard Nimoy. As you said, most people are going to know that name from Star Trek. And so writing a memoir is deeply personal anyway, but writing a memoir about someone that is so well known in that capacity, I would imagine would be a challenge. So why did you decide to write the memoir?
Well, the memoir is really, it's about the process of recovery that I've been in, which enabled me to reconcile with my dad. My dad and I had a lot of difficulties, both when I was growing up, when I was younger, and later on in life, a lot of conflict. He was a admitted alcoholic. I am an admitted pothead. I've been in recovery for 20 years, but I was a wake and baker for about 30 years of my life. And the conflict that we had was sort of exacerbated by our own addictions and challenges in terms of emotional growth. I mean, a lot of times you get very in arrested development when you're drinking or using. You're not growing spiritually. You're not maturing emotionally. And this was a stumbling block for my dad and I throughout the course of our lives until he got in recovery and I got in recovery. I've been in the recovery world now for 20 years, and the book is really about the triumph of the tools of recovery and helping us find a way to reconcile with one another.
Yeah, and which was not easy. I said this during my intro, but I will say it again, in that I learned a lot about recovery from this memoir, and I really appreciated what I learned about recovery, because it is one thing to kind of know it in theory and another to read someone's experience about their own process and their own journey with recovery. So I think that's one way in which memoirs are incredibly helpful reads, because they help us to understand not only the person that we're reading about, but people in general, especially people that we know who may have similar experiences similar to what we are reading in the memoir. But we're going to go ahead and take our first break for this episode. When we come back, Adam will be talking about his father's upbringing and how that affected his life and their life as father and son and their relationship. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Adam Nimoy. Really quickly, one more time as we head into this second segment, if you want to support the podcast in a monetary fashion, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info. There you're able to leave a tip or donation. Reading about your childhood and just not easy in terms of emotionally connecting, because I think the title is good, The Most Human, that makes that reference to Spock, who was very logical and not very emotional. In some ways, that was your dad, not in touch with his emotions. Well, do you want to talk a little bit about his background?
Sure, yeah. So my dad was born in Boston in 1931. His parents were Russian immigrants. They actually came from Ukraine, but they considered themselves Russian at that time. they left Ukraine, they left their village because of violence against Jews, the pogroms. And in that way, they're very much in line with a lot of the Jewish diaspora, the movement of Jews around Europe, and a lot of the influx of immigrants to America, trying to avoid violence against our people. And they ended up in the middle of a major metropolitan area. They're in the west end of Boston. They came from a small village, and it was quite the culture shock for them. And my dad was born into that kind of milieu where his parents were not that demonstrative. They were not that loving. I mean, I knew them very well, and they were very restrained. My dad would say not demonstrative. They were very restrained with him. And his whole experience growing up as the son of immigrants in Boston was to generate cash, because it was the Depression and money was tight with them. So my father worked a number of odd jobs, beginning from a very early age. He was selling newspapers on the Boston Common in the middle of winter when he was 10 years old, and pursuing this acting bug that he had, which really came to him when he was 8 years old. He was cast in a production of Hansel and Gretel in a small theater in Boston. And after that, he was pursuing small theater productions throughout the city and went to Boston College on a scholarship one summer in the drama department. And when he told his parents that he wanted to come out to Hollywood to become an actor, they basically disowned him. They were appalled and devastated because they wanted him to go to college and become a lawyer or a doctor. That was the American dream for a lot of immigrants. And his older brother did fulfill that. His older brother went to MIT and became a chemical engineer for Johnson & Johnson for 30 years. That was not my dad's calling in any way. I mean, he was a very bright man for how undereducated he was, but academia was not his thing. So he came to LA and then had a hustle to support himself, and that was in 1949. He was 18 years old. And then by 1956, he had a family of four to support. I was born in 56, and this is a man who knew how to really generate cash by hustling a plethora, I like to say, of odd jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of different things until Star Trek hit in 1966. So when I was 10 years old in 66 and things started to finally ease up economically in our household, I wasn't hustling. I had a very different upbringing than my dad. I mean, I like to say we were planets apart, just because of our experience. I mean, I was watching 60s TV and reading Amazing Spider-Man comics and listening to the Fab Four. That was my whole experience as a kid, very different from my dad. So, we had a trouble relating to each other. It was very awkward to begin with. And then when I became a teenager and started kind of like, pushing the envelope of behavioral boundaries with my parents, it just turned into a lot of conflict with my dad. And this really is the relationship with my dad for the next 30 years was these incredible experiences, being the son of Leonard Nimoy and the phenomenal success of Star Trek, coupled with periodic episodes of really unfortunate conflict, verbal warfare with him, because we just didn't really connect with one another.
No. And then your relationship with your children is very different. So I would imagine that was a conscious effort on your part, but how much was it more conscious effort, or was it just kind of more your personality in terms of how you wanted to raise your own children?
Well, it was a combination. I mean, I was very much aware of let me put it to you this way. This is what's so interesting. I just had a different mindset because I wasn't desperate to survive like Leonard was. And I had more balance in my life. I still had career goals. I mean, I was an attorney. I wanted to work in the industry. I wanted to be an entertainment attorney. For a while, I really enjoyed the work, and I vigorously pursued the work. At the same time, I wanted to be around for my kids. I mean, they were born in sunny Southern California, just like I was. We had very similar interests, and I liked hanging out with them. I just could relate to them more. But again, I had more time and more balance in my life because I could afford to.
Yeah.
So that came naturally. The interesting thing was that as I was raising my kids, I realized how much I missed out on with my dad, because it just became more graphic that I really did not have a really good relationship with him growing up. And I think it was something I missed out on because I had so much fun with my own kids. So it wasn't so much a conscious effort to do it exactly different thing, raise them differently than my dad raised me. It just kind of turned out that way as a function of the circumstances we were in. Yet still, you have to understand, Sarah. Even though I did everything for my kids, I mean, I love doing that. I mean, getting them to school on time, helping them with their homework, getting them to tutors. I mean, jamming music with my son Jonah. He got the bug, like my dad at age 8. He was drumming, and I was on guitar, and I would even do stupid things like get up at 5 in the morning to get my son and his buddies out to Malibu for a surf trip. You know what I mean? It was crazy. But even after all the things I was doing with them and for them, they still found reasons to hate me.
Yeah.
It's just a part of the formula. I made my own mistakes. We had our own conflict. But the difference was we had a love connection that I just did not have with my dad.
Yeah. Yeah. When it came to writing, and there are several layers. So there is the relationship with your dad. There's the fact that you were both in recovery, and it's kind of an exploration of recovery. How did you decide then which anecdotes or stories or examples to include within the memoir? Because I'm sure you have a lot more that you could have included.
Yeah. Well, I needed help, and I was lucky to find an editor who was willing to work with me for several years to figure out editorial. Look, I come from a filmmaking background, and after my father passed away, I made For the Love of Spock. It's a documentary about Spock and Leonard and me and Spock and Leonard. But I had a very strong-handed editor working with me, collaborating with me, a woman, Janice Hampton, because I need guidance. Sometimes we really need outside influence, somebody who's got more perspective. Now, on that film, Janice was somebody who had a lot of experience in Hollywood as an editor and knew nothing about Star Trek. I love that right away. That's the reasons why I hired her. And I wanted a woman's perspective, and she kept me on track. Well, I used the same formula for the book. I hired an editor here in New York, Brenda Copeland. She had a lot of experience in the industry. She was working in the industry for a while and had been freelance editing for a while. And she knew nothing about Star Trek. Perfect. Because I'm just trying to tell a universal story. It's not just for Trekkies or Trekkers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a father-son story of what do you do when you have this intergenerational conflict? How do you turn the tables? What's the anecdote to that? How do you change the scenario? I had a lot of anecdotes about stuff that happened with my dad, a lot of the conflict with my dad, and a lot of the good stuff with him. And I wanted to include stories about the conflict I had with my kids and my mother, who was the precursor to dealing with the resentment and issues I had with my dad. I had a lot of issues with my mom later on in her life, and my ex-wife. I mean, we wanted to balance all these elements, and I needed help in doing so. So I really needed somebody who could tell me, you don't need this, or focus, or I need more on, you need to expand in this area. So Brenda did exactly what Janice Hampton on the film did for me. She really, she was a strong guiding hand about sticking to theme. What is it we're trying to say? What is the direction of the book? What is your message? What's the moral of the story? And when we had a stronger idea of what it was we were trying to accomplish, then making the decisions about what stays in, and what we should expand on, what stays in, and what we should just get rid of becomes more apparent.
Yeah. Yep. So very helpful to have that outside perspective to kind of steer you in the right direction, right?
It's essential for me. That's just a part of my process. I'm always looking, on my next book that I'm writing now, I'm gonna come up with a draft, and then I have to find another editor to go to take a distance look at it to give me the feedback I need.
Yeah. I think it's so important to have those people who can help us with the big projects. Sometimes we're in the middle of something. We can't always see the overall picture, or we're so immersed in the details, mired in those details. And so it's very helpful to have people who will agree with us, disagree with us, help us see things in a slightly different way, whether or not we always agree or want to make those changes, but it helps to have that other perspective, right? So anyway, we're going to take our second break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about the story of Jonah and the way that it bookends this story. So you are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Adam Nimoy. Before the break, he was talking about including what stories to include in the overall theme and arc of the memoir, and having someone who could really help him to go through that overall story that is being told in the memoir and decide what could be included and not included to help that overall theme. Let's go ahead and return now to the conversation with Adam. One thing that I really liked about the book is that you bookend it with Yom Kippur and the story of Jonah. And Jonah is one of my favorites because, I mean, it's a story a lot of people know, but my favorite part is just how melodramatic he is when they actually do what he asks and repent. And he's so mad that he just sits down under a tree and says, I just want to die. Like, he's so melodramatic. So it's, you kind of encapsulate that beautifully in the last part of the book. Why did you decide to frame the book with the atonement story, with the Jonah story?
Well, because, it starts off with my relationship with my dad, and Book of Jonah was, it's a story of atonement. It's a story of forgiveness. It's a story of making amends. And that's what my book is about. That is what I accomplished with my father. But we started off very far apart from that at the beginning of the story. However, one of the things that did, the fact is I was always proud of my dad. I was always proud of what he had accomplished. And this is one of the ways that Brenda helped me take the onus off of talking about some of the conflict and some of the unfortunate things that happened with Leonard. I have to be very careful. Leonard Nimoy is adored by fans all over the world.
Right.
And people don't necessarily want to hear dirty laundry about Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah.
So, I have to be very careful about the way I approach him, which is always with reverence, always with pride about what he had accomplished, with always a sense of understanding of where he came from and why he did some of the things, why he had trouble parenting, really, because he just didn't have great modeling and he came from a different generational world than me. So I can give him a lot of leeway and understanding. It's not an indictment. It's not a judgment book, but one of the things that did bind me with my father were some of these experiences, like going with him to Yom Kippur, to the synagogue, where he would read from Book of Jonah. That was a tradition we had in our family. Every year, he would read from beginning to end the entire story of Book of Jonah. And in the afternoon on Yom Kippur, there's plenty of time to do that because there's no one in the shul. Everyone's got home to try to distract themselves because they're fasting, from being hungry, or they just go home to eat,
Right. But you're right. If any, like I was picturing this, and if you just randomly walk in, and wait, is Spock reading the Book of Jonah? Like, I think that's that people would have kind of a moment of, wait a minute, is Leonard Nimoy reading right now? Would be an experience.
Well, this is a part of the book of the reverence I have for my dad. I had that experience. I'm sitting in the shul with him. He's my dad. I've seen him do it dozens of times, but he's so good, Sarah. He's so good. His voice is amazing. He's a trained actor all his life, and he just gives everything he has when he reads the book. He's phenomenal, and it's just a great experience. And that's why I say, if Star Trek fans knew they could just walk in here and listen to and sit in the front row and watch him read this thing, the place would be packed.
Right.
But I had, that's why I feel like very, very fortunate that I had that experience with him. At the same time, we also learn on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We read one of the passages we read from the Old Testament, the Bible, Torah, is something called the Akedah. It's the binding of Isaac. It's when Abraham takes his son up to Mount Moriah to sacrifice him.
Yeah.
And it is a touchstone and a keystone of the way I felt about my dad, that sometimes we were at such odds that we just wanted to throttle each other. Mm-hmm. And that is, and the Jewish tradition, my dad is heavily identified with with the Jewish community. I identify with the community, and that is a part of our tradition, and it's been going on. This is something that happened 4,000 years ago. So it sets up the central question of the book, which is, what do we do about it? How do we go against the grain? How do we change the course of history, or are we doomed to repeat this cycle of dysfunction between fathers and sons? And that really is the theme of the book. And I didn't know what to do with Leonard, because I thought I could take him on and show him when he was wrong and prove to him when he was wrong and go toe to toe to Leonard. And on that score, I was wrong. Because he's just a tough kid from the streets of Boston. He was just too powerful. I could not take him on, and I needed help and a recovery.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I think, what you balance really well with you, whether it's your writing and the combination of your writing and the editing balances really well is showing that reverence that you had, the pride that you had, but also the fact that this man is human. Everyone's human, and you're gonna have conflict. So on the one hand, you're gonna have people that do not want to see this icon as anything but their icon. And he's your dad. So yeah, you do a really good job of showing that conflict. And it's hard when you read there's that turning point with the letter that he writes to you, and just, I know it's in the past, but my heart broke for you, the person that you were reading that letter, but it was a step. It was kind of that turning point. And we want people to read the book, so we don't want to give too much away. But if you want to talk about that a little bit, please.
Yeah, sure. Look, so when I went in recovery in 2004, I was also going to Al-Anon meetings. Al-Anon is for people who have a family member who has a drug or alcohol problem.
Yeah.
And my initial qualifier was my dad, because of his alcoholism. And this is something he admitted to, oddly enough, in an interview with Bill Shatner. He went into great detail about his history with alcohol. My dad and I were pretty much estranged during this period, because I was, one of the mantras of Al-Anon is detach with love. That's the way we try to deal with these dysfunctional, toxic relationships. And it just got really very difficult with my dad. And there was just too much conflict. There were too many things we disagreed on, and we couldn't find any way to resolve any of that conflict. And it just kept reappearing. This is the weird combination of my life with Leonard, is amazing experiences, like we were just talking about, going to Spain to watch him make Catlow, this Western. I got out of middle school for 2 months, or we were there for almost 3 months. And he was fabulous in the role, and it was just a great experience. At the same time, I had this horrible conflict with him because he was just not in a great headspace. And that kept repeating itself. These great experiences punctuated by periodic and regular episodes of flat out conflict with the guy, verbal warfare. And my dad had warned me early on when I was a teenager, look, it's going to be tough arguing with me, because he said I'm very verbal and very loud sometimes. I'm basically a tough kid from the streets of Boston. You just don't screw with me. And number 3, I am rich and famous. So try arguing with a pop culture icon. It's very, very difficult when you have millions of fans saying you're the greatest thing that's ever happened in my life. No. And you've got your kid saying, well, wait a minute. You're like you said, you're human, and you have, I respect you. I love you, but you're not always right. Sorry. So with Al-Anon, it helped me try to really kind of I got to take a step back from him and draw some boundaries with him. And the love part of detaching was, we showed up for him, and there was a lot to show up for. There was the premieres, the screenings, his photography exhibits. We had a big opening at the Griffith Park Observatory, the Leonard Nimoy Event Horizon Theater. I was there. Even when I was not completely welcomed by him, I showed up for him. But the detachment weighed heavily on him, because my dad was the kind of guy who felt like even negative engagement with me was better than estrangement. And that's why it weighed on him heavily that he wrote me this letter where, he kind of outlined all the reasons why he thought I was the problem in the relationship, that my life had been just a lot of mistakes I had made in my life.
Yeah.
He basically took my inventory. I mean, I have my own foibles, and I said and did a lot of stupid things with him. I was not appropriate always in interacting with him. Well, he kept score and made a list of those things, and this is how I got this letter from him. It was pretty devastating. But this is the thing, Sarah, you have to understand about recovery. It's like these are very challenging moments in interpersonal relationships. But when you're in recovery, it's a blessing to have these things because you get to practice the tools of recovery. Now, I'm an addict in recovery, and when people piss me off, my inclination is not to do this, live long and prosper. It's to do this, flip them off. And it pissed me off that he wrote that letter. And my first inclination was to write him a letter, with all his character defects. I was keeping score as well.
Yeah.
This is the problem. This is the problem of Book of Jonah. He kept score against these people who said, "You're right. We want to atone for all the sins we did, and we're going to change our behavior."
But
yeah, he had good reasons to be upset with these people, but when they atoned, he himself could not let go of his own resentments towards them. Well, my dad and I had the same problem, and I had my own resentments towards my dad. I wanted to take his inventory, but I'm in recovery, and we don't do that, and we have tools to use, and I talk about it in the book. And we have a lot of sayings and mantras. And at first I thought it was a bunch of mumbo jumbo 12-step AA nonsense.
Right.
But over time I began to realize that these are real tools to help me, finally grow up, frankly.
I got to be honest, a letter like that would have gutted me. I would have been heartbroken and oh, so very angry. I mean, I was angry just reading about Adam's experience with that letter and the unfairness of it and how easy it would have been to take. I mean, there's so many approaches he could have taken in response to that letter. And obviously he took the approach that he did, and it led to a different relationship with his father. But whew, that one made me angry. I was projecting all over that part of the book. But I mean, that's why we read about other people's experiences, right? Because it maybe helps give us a new perspective on some of our own experiences. But we're going to go ahead and take our next break of this episode. When we come back, we're going to be continuing this conversation because I kind of stopped it. I stopped it in the middle of it. But Adam's going to talk about the tools of recovery that actually helped him to have that conversation with his dad and helped him to react in a way that maybe I wouldn't have wanted to, or maybe he didn't want to, but he had those tools at his disposal. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Adam Nimoy. Before the break, Adam was talking about a 6-page letter he received from his father, his reaction to that letter, and how it did ultimately help change his relationship with his father. So let's go back to that conversation with Adam. Right.
But over time, I began to realize that these are real tools to help me, finally grow up, frankly. And they're little things like pause when agitated, restraint of pen and tongue, let go and let God, contrary action. And my, one of my favorites is don't just do something, sit there.
Yeah.
because our brains just start going into overdrive, and we just want to immediately react to this stuff.
Yeah.
So I didn't react to this letter he had written me. I was trying to practice the principles and just let him get it out and hope that he would feel better after letting loose all this stuff that he felt towards me, and that maybe we would have a good relationship. But it was then that a friend of mine in recovery said, you can do even one more, which is practice steps 8 and 9, make an amends to your father for everything in that letter, which is counterintuitive for me, because I'm like Leonard, I just want to fight. I don't want to give in. I don't want to capitulate, and I don't want to say I'm sorry to the guy when he's not apologizing to me. Why should I do it?
Yeah.
But the fact is, the amends was for me to also let go of my own resentment towards him, like Jonah needed to let go of his resentment towards the people of Nineveh. And when I made the amends to my dad, to his credit, he was ready to let go of his own resentments, because he was enjoying this experience so much so that when it was over, he invited me to Shabbat dinner the following Friday night. And after that, everything, the whole game changed between the two of us.
Yeah. Yeah. And all you had to do was just do the exact opposite of what you wanted to do with your middle finger.
Exactly. All I had to do was say, I'm sorry. He wanted he wanted validation. He just wanted to, he kept saying, I said, like, why are you doing all this? What do you want? He said, I want clarity. The clarity for him was to feel that he had feelings about some of the stuff that happened. The odd thing about my dad is the following. This is and I sometimes I remembered to talk about this, and sometimes it slips away from me. But with all the adulation and all the success and all the accolades that Leonard Nimoy received throughout his entire life, there was still something that he needed, a validation that he needed. And there was only one person who could give it to him, and that was me. That's the weird thing about this whole experience. He wanted me to acknowledge things that happened between him and I from his perspective. And this is a big part of recovery, is acceptance, accepting my dad for who he is, accepting his feelings, accepting his point of view, and just acknowledging that. And acceptance is not approval. This is a critical distinction in recovery. I can accept my dad, I can accept his point of view, I can apologize for my part in it, and my part of it is also a part of recovery. It's the fourth column of the fourth step. The fourth step is all about resentments, who pissed us off, how they did it, what part of our ego is affected, and the famous fourth column of the fourth step, what is our part in it? Mm-hmm. And I play a part in all of that with my dad. So I was willing. I finally got to a point where, fine, I'm just gonna give him what he wants. I was told to do that. Just validate his feelings and see what happens. When I got that 6-page letter, my sister, who was very empathetic to my trouble with him, she had her own problems with my dad, but I really got the brunt of it. My sister said to me, you cannot let him get away with this, because she found out about this 6-page rant, really. And my response to her is, yes, I can, and I'm going to, because I can't take him on anymore.
Yeah.
And this amends to him was one step further, which was to give him what he wanted, which was validation of his point of view, of his feelings, because he never got it from his parents.
Yeah.
And he couldn't, and all those fans couldn't give it to him. He needed it from me. He wanted it from me. And that was a power I had over him for a long time. And my answer was, no, I'm not going to give it to you, because you don't deserve it.
Yeah.
Because you don't validate my feelings. So why should I validate yours? Sometimes we have to parent our own parents. Mm-hmm. And this was one of those times. And I just gave it to him. Again, I'm accepting him without approving of it necessarily. And I'm not forgetting what happened, but I'm forgiving all of that, because it's just a waste of time for me.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, as I talk about in the book, when I had my own personal tragedy, my dad showed up for me. He finally became the dad I needed him to be. And we call that it's a living amends. He made a living amends to me. I couldn't have asked for anything more from him.
Yeah. And, it's so easy to focus on, well, why did it have to be like this for so long? And why, I would imagine, because we are all just human and muddling through our own lives, it would be easy to focus on, well, we had X number of years with this conflict. But again, something I appreciate from the book is just the fact that you both you as the author, especially, you move forward and you say, okay, well, yes, we had that, but how are we moving forward now?
Yeah, I mean that's the whole key of the book is what can be done. How do you move forward? I mean, yeah, it took us years to get there. My point of view is it's all about attitude and point of view and perspective, in changing your perspective, which is difficult to do for us. I mean, we're creatures of habit. But this is, this is the whole point of the Serenity Prayer, which we say at almost every freaking 12-step meeting, which is God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, i.e. Leonard and anybody else in my life, the courage to change the things we can, i.e. me, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's like, please God, help me, accept them, change me. It's hard enough for me, Sarah, to change my own behavior. I mean, this is the struggle of the book. I mean, it's freaking hard to change your perspective and my view of my own dad and what went down and the regret and and just the dissatisfaction. I mean, it's very hard to change your own behavior. Why would I try to change him? It's impossible.
Yeah, impossible, but so very human nature, right? We always want people to change to be what we think they should be, or to fit our needs, emotions, expectations.
Exactly. But the key with recovery is the more I changed, he came along for the ride. That's the beauty of it all. He changed too. Once I let him be who he wanted to be and needed to be, and gave him the space, he filled that space with his priorities were different at this point in his life. He was no longer in the struggle. He had financial security. He was toning down the work he was doing. His priority was family. He said this in an interview flat out. Priority had become family, including me. And I welcomed that. I gave him the space to fill that void that we had. He finally became a dad to me when I really, really needed him. And what's to be celebrated is the last 7 or 8 years of his life, I was really tight with the guy. So much so that in 2013, I called him up and said, we're going to Boston. I'm hiring a camera crew. We're going to be there for 3 or 4 days. We're going to film you walking all over town. You're going to talk about everything that happened to you growing up in that city. And we did it. And it was crazy fun. It was a real bonding experience. It was a way for me to honor my father. It was a way for my dad to look back at his life and bookend his life. It was a way for us to celebrate the phenomenal trajectory of this scrawny Jewish kid from the West End of Boston and what he had accomplished in his life.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I mean, not everyone gets that gift. So that's amazing. You mentioned a bit ago that you are writing another memoir. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, very little, because I have to get the approval of my next editor,
Sure,
my publicist, my
just
agent,
just a
and my
concept.
publisher. Yeah, it's going to be more of the same. It's going to be more about my experience on planet Earth.
Makes sense.
Yeah, more memoir, more nonfiction, more of what it's what it's like being on this crazy planet.
Yeah. Well, like I said at the beginning, it's very hard to sum up your life in 2 minutes. So you can't fit everything in one memoir, right?
No, I mean, and I'm writing what I know. I love the craft of writing. I love the craft of editing. It's not dissimilar from what I did in filmmaking. It's a great form of art. I have the time to do it. I have the opportunity to do it. I want to continue to do it. I have more to say. Life on planet Earth is freaking complicated.
I gotta say, I love the reference to life on this crazy planet and the fact that this crazy planet is absolutely freaking complicated. Whew, can't disagree with that statement at all. But we're going to go ahead and take our final break of this episode. When we come back, Adam will be giving his advice for aspiring authors. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Adam Nimoy. Before the break, Adam was talking about his current work in progress. Let's go ahead and return to that conversation with Adam. So, as someone who's been on planet Earth for a while, but you've been a writer, you've been a director, you've been a parent, but if for someone who's maybe they're thinking of writing memoir, what one piece of advice would you give?
One piece of advice. Well, there's so many things that in my mind about that. You have to write what you know, be honest, spill all the blood on the page. I once was in a writing class, and the instructor said, if you're writing a memoir and you don't piss off other members of your family, it's not a very good memoir.
Yeah.
I mean, and you have to take risks. I mean, I took a lot of risks with this book. By the same, because I was writing about a lot about conflict and my personal experiences with not only with my dad, who's not around to refute any of that or to approve any of that, but with my ex-wife and with my, and my kids as well.
Yes.
And they are around. And one of the ways that I kind of dealt with them, because I still have close relationships with them, was I read to them everything in the book. I said, I'm going to publish this, and I want to know if you're okay with it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like I sent them a PDF and expected them to wade through 300 pages and find those chapters that they appear in. I actually sat everybody down, and I said, and after I decided with Brenda, the editor, what we're going to include, so that I didn't infuriate people with stuff that I was going to edit out anyway.
Right.
Then I read through with them, and it was a really I think that is the way to go. For me, it was the way to go, because my kids, my son Jonah, coincidentally, he's named Jonah, was like, no, this episode will never appear in any publication that you have, because I don't want people to know about it. It's too personal. And I said, fine, I don't need it, and I got rid of it. But then with my ex-wife Nancy, we have this altercation in the book with the LAPD, a little domestic squabble we had on the street in front of our home when we were separated. And I read it to her, and she said, well, I said a lot more to that cop that you didn't include in there. And I want it in there. And I said, and I got out my laptop. What is it? Let me have it. And I included it, and it was wonderful. Yeah, she said, I said this, and then he said that, and I said this. This is great dialogue. Keep going. So that is one way to take the curse off of it. But you have to be fearless. And the other thing, just the bottom line for me is the more specific, and this is something I learned in filmmaking, and this is what I learned from my dad, the more specific we are about our experience and our journey, the more detailed we are about it, the more it rings universal for people, because this story is resonating with people. That's why I wrote the book. I was sharing the story of my relationship with my dad in AA anonymously, and people were coming up to me saying, that really struck me, what happened, and I'm going to call my dad. I'm going to make an amends to my mother tonight. I'm just going to do it and just see what happens. So it really was inspiring people. Again, they don't know I'm related to Leonard Nimoy. They don't need to know.
Right.
It's just a universal story of family dysfunction. And my hope is, this is a part of my recovery, is that if you don't share it, we share experience, strength, and hope in these meetings. If you don't give it away, then you don't have it and you can't keep it. I'm trying to be of service to the rest of the recovery community, and you don't have to be an addict or an alcoholic to be in recovery. You don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to say, you don't have to be in recovery or specifically in recovery for there to be so many things that you talk about from your lens of recovery and AA that are helpful in relationships, because we all have conflict, and we all have people that we just butt heads with.
Yes, Al-Anon does not require you to be sober. We're not sober in Al-Anon. People are not sober in Al-Anon necessarily. You don't need to be.
Right.
But they are the same tools of recovery, and they're very helpful in dealing with the challenges of being on this freaking crazy planet.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a crazy planet. As we are kind of wrapping things up, if people want to know more about this book, your previous book, the upcoming book, where can they find you on the internet?
Just www.adamnimoy.com. I'm trying to update everything with appearances to promote the book, The Most Human. Where to get the book, interviews with people like you about the book, or print media reviews of the book. It's all, my social handles are all there for Instagram And for Twitter X, it's all right there on the webpage.
Okay, thank you so much. Adam, is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to make sure that you highlight during our time together?
I can't think of anything at the moment. I think we've covered everything, Sarah. I don't know.
Wonderful. Well, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know you're in New York, so thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about the book and your life. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me, and to you and all your listeners and watchers, live long and prosper.
Thank you. Thank you once again to Adam for joining me to talk about his memoir. Also, I'm just slightly envious of anybody who can do the live long and prosper that easily. Although, actually, when I do it like this, it doesn't look that bad. You can't tell that my fingers totally don't line up, right? Like my fingers go out. From the front, it doesn't look that bad. I can't do it at all with my left hand. I can't get those fingers to separate. So envious of people that make it look effortless. At any rate, thank you once again to Adam. If you are a fan of memoir, maybe you are a Star Trek fan, maybe you are in recovery or know someone who's in recovery or are interested in learning more about that process and those tools and the way that they can affect relationships, whatever those reasons, you should definitely check this book out. Adam also has a memoir that was released previously, so you've got 2 to read if you want to, and then that will set you up for the 3rd memoir whenever it comes out. But also, we are in gift giving season, so if you're looking for a book, a memoir, a gift for someone in your life who would be interested in any of those things, then here is an opportunity to look into this book. So thank you once again to Adam. Thank you as always to you for joining me for this episode. I hope you will join me for the next interview. I'll be speaking with author Kimberly Brock about her book, The Fabled Earth. This is historic fiction, 2 different time periods, one in the 1930s, one in the 1950s, multiple points of view. I'm very much looking forward to speaking with Kimberly about this book and learning more about it. I hope that you will join me for that conversation. In the meantime, as always, if you're a fan of this podcast and have not done so already, please do like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to it or watching it on. That really does help. Always lets you know when there is a new episode, so you can tune in to find hopefully new authors that you have maybe never heard of, or listen to an interview with a favorite author that you have loved for a long time. Either way, it's great. Another way you can help the podcast is to leave a positive review. Really does help. Also, remember to do that for your authors. Those positive reviews really do help get the algorithming and get the podcast out to more readers such as yourselves. If you're on social media, you can follow the podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky. I think that's it off the top of my head. Yes, love hearing from you, so come find the podcast on social media. It's Friday. I hope you've had a great week. I hope you have something going on this weekend that will bring you joy. If that's reading, then I hope you have lots and lots of that time. I hope the weekend offers you plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to